I'm your host, Scott Norton, and welcome to At Large. On this show, I talk to world-class creatives who use business to bring their ideas to life. We'll hear about their creative practices, their most interesting stories, and the lessons that'll inspire you the way that they've inspired me. My guest today is me. So you can get to know me a little better, I've asked Kyle Thiermann to host this interview. Kyle is a journalist turned copywriter, responsible for award-winning national ad campaigns. He's also a Patagonia-sponsored big wave surfer, environmental activist, and author of an upcoming book about how to interview your parents. We talk about the power of play in building a business, how to get good at things you're bad at, and the unexpected dangers of listening to your gut. Please enjoy my conversation with Kyle.
All right, and away we go. Scott Norton.
Here I am on my own podcast.
Here you are.
Thank you for joining us.
I know. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me. I was driving over here and I was thinking about one of the first times we met. I took you surfing out of the Venice breakwater. The waves were fun, and the tide was going out. So when we came in, there was all this wet sand. Do you remember this?
Absolutely.
And you gave me what was essentially a business strategy session by drawing diagrams in the sand like it was a whiteboard, like some mad scientist of business growth. And I think that one thing that's interesting about the way you see the world is that you believe that all good ideas or many good ideas come from this insight, this kind of overlooked moment that many people just don't see. What was the opportunity spotting moment when you started Sir Kensington?
Well, what you say really resonates with me in that so much of creativity and figuring out what to build is about noticing what's hidden in plain sight and seeing potential futures that others don't really see. And with Sir Kensington's, at the time we had the idea, we were not professionals, we were amateurs. And I think that actually contributes to the fact that we could even see this thing that was hidden in plain sight. But the opportunity spotting moment really came out of a conversation where a friend and I were talking about how weird it was that there were so many different types of mustards in the grocery store. Yellow mustard, sweet mustard, whole grain mustard, Dijon mustard, but there was really only one type of ketchup. There was really only one dominant brand, which was Heinz. And then everyone else, which were much smaller players in the market, they weren't actually doing something different. They were just copying Heinz, right? They were like Heinz, but worse. Same package, same texture, same ingredients. And so the opportunity that we saw is to say, well, if everyone's trying to compete in this market by doing something that's the same, right, and then trying to copy the market leader, how do we do something that is dramatically different?
So how did this conversation come about?
Well, in this particular conversation, I was visiting Los Angeles as I had a friend who went to USC, one of our co-founders, Brandon Child. We were in his Volvo listening to Fela Kuti, Afrobeat, with our shirts off, just driving through LA. And he turned to me and he said, I have an idea that I think is going to be huge. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I hear ideas all the time. And he was like, gourmet ketchup. And he pitched me on it. At first, I was like, that's like, no, like Americans don't even know what's in ketchup. Like Heinz is monopoly. It's the only product people recognize. Seems really difficult. And he's like, well, exactly. Like, think about the fact that there isn't any choice. And so I said, well, okay, this is a bad idea, but if we were to go about this, you have to do it by being the opposite of Heinz. And so like if Heinz is, in plastic, we would need to be in glass. And if Heinz is kind of squirted indiscriminately, like we would need our product to be scooped, right? Like with a, a gold spoon, like a high-end European preserve. And Heinz is like so American, right? Like it gets made fun of all over the world for being so American. Americans love ketchup. We would need to be really kind of like over the top fancy. Like we need to make it English. We would need to like create some sort of like English night. So it's just one of those ideas that was like boom, 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 like the entire concept in a 5-minute almost like riff.
Wow.
And people asked, they were like, were you high? like, okay, we're in college, we're shirts off, listen to Afrobeat, and we actually weren't. I'd like to say perhaps we were high shortly before and perhaps slightly after,
but during
the
that
actual
time,
moment,
we were high on life
of unreal sober clarity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I always have found in my own life, and in the rare moments that I have a good idea, they feel really easy. Bad ideas are what feel like you're trying to cram something into something else that doesn't really fit.
Yes.
So did it, like, in that moment, did it feel like this is almost too easy? Like, how has no one else thought of this? What did it feel like in your body when you had the idea that essentially turned into a new category?
It felt like play. And that's why it feels easy.
Okay.
Is because so many bad ideas are the result of being in a place of work, right? You're on a deadline. You need to solve a problem. Like, we weren't solving a problem, we were playing, right? We were in a moment of play. Like, what is play for a 21-year-old that's driving around listening to Afrobeat in Los Angeles? And this was kind of an extension of that. And then if you can take that idea, right, that was created in a moment of play and say, all right, how do we cherish the integrity of the play that is inherent to this idea, but give it like the right diligence and structure and grit that it takes to actually bring something into reality? That's, I think, the source of the best ideas from play.
So you now have this idea for a product that doesn't really exist. People don't see ketchup as a gourmet product. And you and your buddy, shirts off, are thinking, let's do the opposite of what everyone else has done right now. And how did you then create a story around this product to make it feel big and get people on board with this idea? How quickly did it come to, okay, we need to take this from the physical world and create a story around it if we want to turn this into a successful business?
Yeah. As you're asking this question, I'm realizing that the answer actually ended up being more play. Because what we did was I brought the idea to my co-founder, Mark, back in college, and I pitched him on it, and he was like, well, we should actually do this. And so he was the impetus that took it from an idea and a story to actually something that we could physically create. And we had a lot of fun making these various ketchups because we decided to do was not make one, but we wanted to make 6 because we weren't chefs and we didn't know like what was the going to be the best recipe. So we figured, why don't we sample people on it and let them tell us in a kind of a rapid prototyping process which one was the best and then make it better from there. And the way that we did that was, again, work and play. The traditional way that this would be approached by a company is with a focus group. Right. You pay people with like a Starbucks gift card to come to your, windowless room and give you information that they don't even know what they really want. And instead we said, let's throw a party. And so we slipped invitations into people's college mailboxes that had a picture of a man with a top hat and a bow tie and coattails that said, Sir Kensington invites you to a ketchup tasting, with a date and my off-campus apartment address. And people were like, what is this? But it felt like a postcard from another universe, right? And so it set up this sense of play. And then it was jacket required. People would come, they came, and it was a costume party, essentially, right? Costume party. And I think great humor often has every element of it that is expected and straight and serious, with one thing that is really off, right? Like that's satire. Like think about A Modest Proposal. Do you remember this?
No, I never saw that.
Swift, who wrote it. But A Modest Proposal is 100 years ago or more. There was this like op-ed written that to solve a crisis of like famine and nutrition, we should eat the poor and like eat the homeless. Right. And it was written in a way that was a direct and logically framed argument, which is of course absurd, but it is commentary about classism at the time.
Right.
And so that's humor, that's satire, and it's effective because everything is serious except for this one thing that's off. And so with Sir Kensington's, we took it all so seriously, except for the one conceit and the one tension of the product was that it was the lowest of the low food category of like ketchup with the highest of the high echelons of sort of societal dressings, which was Sir Kensington himself, right? And the ingredients and the care that we gave to it. And so that created a sense of play and a sense of being in on the joke for people. And then, of course, we coupled that with work ethic and structure and planning and grit and the sales process to then support and really stoke the flame of this sense of play.
You once told me that one of the most important skills you ever learned in your life was improv.
Mm-hmm.
Had you done improv prior to the idea of Sir Kensington's?
Yes, I learned improv in high school. I was part of an improv group, and I co-led the improv group of our high school. And so improv was always really natural to me, and I love learning the tenets of improv. You know, the first rule of improv in our crew was don't try and be funny. It will turn out funny, and the audience will find it funny, but don't try and be funny. Second rule of improv is never say no to your partner. Always affirm and elevate. Always yes and. And those, I don't know about never trying to be funny because I'm a dad now, so I make a dad jokes. Yeah. So forget rule number one. But rule number two of never say no to your partner, I as much as I possibly can, try and take that attitude in the business setting. And I see business as improvisation. And I see, even professional settings as improvisation and to some degree as theater. Because what is a business suit if not a costume, right? Even here in Los Angeles, like what is what is a pair of baggy linen pants, if not a costume, right? It's communicating kind of who we are, who our character is. And so I think seeing the theater of life is a big kind of unlock.
Yeah. And what I'm getting at here is that you yes-anded your way through a 5-minute conversation that you were then able to sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. Like that juxtaposition of what yes-anding and being someone who collaborates as a creative in a room can get you is, I think, that thread is often not seen, right? And people do not want to be in rooms where people are like, no, that won't work. Like you need to have a collaborative space where you can throw out stupid ideas to get to really great ideas.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great way that you frame that, but I do try and yes and my way to the top.
Right. Well, and I think that the conceit of this podcast is interesting because, in music, we know that if a song is not written from the heart, right, you can't create a bestseller in a boardroom.
Right.
With music, we just know like it needs to come from some kind of deep emotional pain, some private place. Writing books, we know this, that there is something that you cannot chat GPT your way through.
That's right.
But in business, I think people often come at the idea from, okay, well, we just need to make as much money as possible, and we can kind of paint by numbers this because other people have done it too.
Yeah.
Which is a fundamentally different orientation than how you seem to start Sir Kensington's, right? You threw a costume party, right? And that was your focus group.
Yes. And you, by the way, you can be successful in business without that sense of play. And I think it really differs by industry, actually. And Sir Kensington's was a business that hinged on delighting consumers, and consumables businesses that are kind of on top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs have to delight consumers. So that's a muscle that has to be present. So the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of businesses that don't really require this sense of play. They might not be so fun to work at, but in this line of business, I think the play and the creativity really matters. And so you what you're describing is soul. Like there is a sense of soul that creates a genuine emotional connection with a product or with a business that I think it really typifies the greatest consumer brands and consumer products.
Okay, so you and your co-founder, you have this idea, you do the costume party, you get into production, it starts growing, you start building a team now. And so you're shifting now from just being the person who's doing to trying to get other people, potentially a lot of other people, to see your vision. I've read the Sir Kensington's philosophy deck, and way up front on one of your first pages, you have a quote by Simon Sinek that says, every company can tell you what they do. Most can tell you how they do it, but very few can articulate why they do it. What did that quote mean to you, and why did you put it in the Sir Kensington's philosophy deck?
Yeah. Well, we had this great sense of play, and I think we had kind of acute brand and like acute branding, and we did have a world that people could inhabit if they squinted and imagined it. But about 3 to 4 years in to the company, we were treading water. Like we were growing from a very small base, and we were gaining distribution, but we weren't famous yet. We were definitely not consensus as, oh yeah, this thing is successful, or I love that stuff. It hadn't really broken through in society yet. And so I did kind of a tour of talking with people that I respected, that had built businesses, consumer businesses before, our investors, just like thought partners. And the same theme kept coming up over and over again, which is that the greatest brands in the world, the greatest consumer companies in the world, are all united by some sort of a sense of mission and purpose. And it's not always front and center, right? Like to Simon Sinek's quote, everyone knows that like Nike makes shoes, but when you peel back the layers of the onion, all like everything that Nike does is rooted in this idea of empowering athletes on and off the field, which is their mission. And when you think about their motto, just do it, it's not about shoes. It's about people's relationship with their own willpower. And being able to unlock people's willpower and shorten the distance between where they are and where they want to be, that's what sets Nike apart. And so I realized that, okay, we knew that we made a ketchup with better, higher integrity ingredients. We knew that it was kind of cute to look at and looked attractive on a table or on like a grocer's shelf. But we actually didn't know. We had never really put into words, like, why are we here? Like in 10 years, if we're successful, how does the world look different? And so the reason why that quote was important was because we spent time asking our team and thinking ourselves of, well, why is this work important? Like, why do we do what we do? Why do you asking our team members, why do you work here? Like, what are you most proud of? And the common answer that kept coming back after we looked at the results was that people believed food was special, and they wanted to be part of the story of making food better. And so that became the unifying message, and the unifying mission of Sir Kensington's was to bring what we called integrity and charm to ordinary and overlooked food. Integrity being the elements of the quality and the purity of the products, but also the standards in which we like held ourselves to and communicated, right? People want to be part of an upstanding company, which this was, because it was trying to create something better. And then charm, right? To not lose a sense of that play, right? To bring the fun and the theater and like recognize the fact that like our quote unquote like boss was a cartoon, like English gentleman. That became our mission as a company.
Okay. So you now have this strong why that is in some ways a compass for what you should do and what you should not do.
Yes.
Right? Who you should partner with, what products you should get into, what kinds of people you should hire. Let's talk about the Fries of New York stunt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Fries of New York came about because we had a strategic investor that was a really brilliant creative agency called Mother New York, run by this excellent gentleman and mentor named Andrew Diekman, who believed in us and They invested in us, and alongside that investment, they said, okay, we will give you enough hours of our time to do a campaign. So you give us a budget and you give us a timeline and we'll put something together. And we said, cool, your timeline is a couple months and your budget is as close to zero as you can possibly make it. And, most creative agencies would not know what to do with a small budget. But instead, there were these two gentlemen who we worked with on the team, Josh Engman and Thomas Kemeny, who are dear friends to this day.
Great book, Junior.
Junior
is
great the book on copywriting that Thomas wrote. Yeah. And they said, okay, well, if you don't have any money to spend, you're going to have to spend some money on production, but we understand that you don't have any money to spend on media. And what that means is no billboards, no TV ads. And so instead of buying media, you need to earn media. So we need to design a campaign that is so noteworthy and newsworthy that you earn media for it. And we're like, that's great. Yeah. Did you do that? It's got to touch consumers. It's got to touch restaurants. It's got to earn media. It's got to highlight the product. So they came up with a bunch of different ideas. And one of them, they said, well, think about how the botanical gardens would do an exhibit on orchids, or the Museum of Natural History would do a show on butterflies. You are all about elevating food and bringing attention to where attention, was overlooked before. We are going to highlight ketchup's closest friend, the French fry, and we are going to together create an exhibition that has every different type of French fry: the curly, the wedge, the waffle cut, the pomme allumette, the pomme souffle, all these different French fries. And we're going to put them in a gallery, put them under glass, and you are going to be the gallerist. Sir Kensington's, the company, will be the gallerist that puts these on display. And so we found a space downtown on the Bowery, and we rented out for 3 days because that's all we could afford. And it was a beautiful exhibit. And I assumed that no one would show up. We had a press preview, and a lot of newspapers and magazines came, and we were written up in the New Yorker, we were written up in the Guardian, we were written up in the New York Times, and all these other things like Time Out New York and like What to Do This Weekend kind of press. And I assumed, like an art gallery, that it would just be me in like an empty room for 3 days. It was packed to the gills for 3 days. From the moment it opened to the moment it closed, people were filing through, and we had little signs that said, like, please do not eat the exhibits. On the first night, we sampled the ketchup with French fries. We gave people little miniature jars. And why I love that so much was not just because it helped put us on the map, but it expressed who we were, right? It expressed like this is the integrity and charm, right? We're going to highlight the integrity of this food by giving it its day in the sun. But it's also a ridiculous idea to create an art gallery of French fries. And so it had this undeniable charm to it and this undeniable wink to it. And so that really expressed who we were. And I love to bring companies to life where you build a world that they can inhabit that expresses who they are.
You said a word in there that I want to talk about a little bit more. You said we were growing, but we weren't famous yet.
Yeah.
I come from a journalism background, and now I work as a copywriter. I've worked at creative agencies, and one of my favorites said, our only job here is to make brands famous. Mm-hmm. That is the primary thing that we need to do right now. And I remember when this creative director said it to me, because I was like, oh, that clarifies and simplifies everything I need to do when I'm thinking about ideas, right? 'Cause it can feel so daunting to just be like, okay, well, we can do this or that, but to be like, Kyle, how would you write this in a press release? Mm-hmm. Which, Fries in New York, that's a newsworthy story. But I don't know that brands often see the value or see that like that's actually what we're trying to do, because it doesn't always result in clicks or immediate sales. Like, did you have to convince people at Sir Kensington's that, hey, this is actually a really worthy way for us to spend our time to do this thing that could have zero effect, but could also do what it did, which was made you culturally relevant?
Yeah. It wasn't controversial for us because we always believed deeply that if you were in upstream culture, then that will result in demand because familiarity creates the sense of comfort for someone to buy something, right? If all of a sudden you are famous, like for this podcast, right? Like when I think about guests, I'm really interested in having conversations with interesting people. But if an actual legitimate famous person were to want to be on this podcast, I would simply say yes, because I could go to anyone and be like, The Rock went on my podcast. Right. And and actually The Rock is a bad example because he is a genius business person. But let's say that you take a very famous like athlete, they'll be like, oh, you had that person on the show. Like, great. Now it's legitimate. Even if that person doesn't know anything about creativity and business, right? I often say that marketing departments, their only goal is to get rich and make the company rich and famous. And there are some marketing departments that are more focused on making the company rich. And there are some marketing departments that are more focused on making the company famous, right? Performance marketing is focused on rich. Brand marketing is focused on famous. And those are the two things that basically drive value for a company. And most companies kind of do them together. And then there's some companies really like in B2B, right? Software, for instance, it's really focused on making the company rich. And in fashion and very high kind of like lifestyle categories, it's much more focused on famous because the link from upstream culture to downstream sales is a bit stronger there. And so, you know, we it was never controversial for us because we always knew that competing with Heinz, which had 100% brand recognition and defined the category, if we weren't well known, right, like we were never going to find our way into people's homes.
Right. It's funny you said famous and familiar because I learned recently that the Latin root of famous is familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, you know, what we're essentially going on. You want to make a brand famous or familiar, right? That's
right. That's yeah.
It accomplishes the same thing. So you started Sir Kensington as a ketchup company. What happened when you brought mayonnaise into the picture?
Yeah. So, you know, many people don't know this, but we founded the company on the idea that ketchup was left behind and we needed to make a better ketchup. And as I said, for a couple of years, we were treading water and we thought that we could just build the whole company around this one thesis of ketchup. But we started realizing, wait a minute, you know, retailers want more than just like a 2 SKU ketchup brand. We should be able to like play in the whole barbecue. And actually the market structure of mayonnaise is pretty similar, right? It's a monopoly or duopoly. There was, you know, at the time, all mayonnaise pretty much used like eggs from cages, used preservatives in it, chemical preservatives. Like you couldn't find the biggest brands in Whole Foods, for instance. And so we said, let's try our hand at making mayonnaise. And when we launched Sir Kensington's mayonnaise, our business totally changed overnight.
Nice.
It quickly became the majority of our sales in retail, and it is where we saw product market fit. And crucially important to this product development, people don't really think about flavored ketchup, but mayonnaise, because of the way that fat carries flavor, is a brilliant chassis for creating flavor variants. And so we could then create a chipotle mayo and an avocado oil mayo and a sriracha mayo. And so we actually started then now defining this new category of flavored mayos for our retailers, which was growing their category. That created this virtuous cycle, right? There's also, and there's no real reason for this, but you learn that so much of consumer demand and consumer culture are these kind of arbitrary, deep, you know, ingrained beliefs and desires. Nobody saw ketchup as unhealthy, even though it was full of sugar and it was highly processed. But everybody saw mayonnaise as unhealthy because it's full of fat. It used to be before it was pasteurized that, oh, you can't leave mayonnaise out in the sun. It'll go bad. It'll go rancid and make you sick. That isn't even true anymore, that it's not pasteurized. But because people understood mayonnaise to be unhealthy, they were much more likely to go with a quote unquote healthy mayonnaise, even if the macronutrient profile was identical, right?
Wow.
So so much of it is just about perception, and mayonnaise became the engine that we grew our business on.
Okay. So you're in it for a few years. You see an opportunity for an exit.
Mm-hmm.
You sell to Unilever.
Yep.
What did it feel like to sell the company? And what was it like in the months following that exit? And I ask because I think that there's, you put clearly your heart and soul into this thing, and it's your baby. You grow it to what you hope to do, but to sell it. What was it like for you to go through that very big life experience?
Yes. Well, I'll say it was surreal. I mean, that would be the first word I would say is surreal, and an overwhelming sense of relief. Because when you're building a company, with every passing month, you make more promises to other people. You become much more socially committed and ingrained in those promises. And, most companies fail, and most business decisions are wrong. And so you're basically just incurring all sorts of debts in the process. So selling the company was surreal, and it was a relief because we could make good on those debts. We could make good on those commitments. It was also surreal in that one day you're kind of just another idiot with a startup, right? And then the next day you were lauded as a business genius.
Yeah, your Wikipedia profile changes.
But you're the same guy.
Yeah.
You're the same exact idiot that you were before, right? And so now all of a sudden it was like, oh, how did you do it? You're doing the same things that you were doing as a struggling entrepreneur that gets you to be a quote unquote successful entrepreneur and exited entrepreneur. And so it was surreal to get that kind of attention. But deep down, I kind of knew that luck had such a big part of it. There's so many reasons. We did get very lucky.
Right.
But what it meant for me and how it really changed my life was that because you're incurring all these debts and making all these commitments, you have no choice but to be maniacally focused on making the one thing work. And, my periscope was down, right? I was totally focused. I thought about Sir Kensington's in the shower in the morning. At night, you wake up, in the middle of the night thinking about it for 7 years. And then because I had an arrangement as part of the sale where we would grow and integrate the business over the course of 3 years, I actually, unlike many entrepreneurs who become kind of out of a job in 6 months and have to figure it out, I had time both to continue to work in the business, but also to think about what's next. And I love ideas. I'm a very curious person. I love learning about people, and I love learning about new topics, and love kind of like growing my circle of competence. Very curious person. And so this gave me actually a permission to do that, because I started getting phone calls of, hey, do you want to work on this project next? Can you advise my company? Do you want to invest in this thing? And so that became a dream for me, because now all of a sudden I had permission to basically, explore intellectually. And I absolutely love that.
Right. It's funny you said relief, like the feeling of selling a company is relief, which makes sense because it's not just like, oh, I just made a bunch of money, but it's like all these people who believed in what I was trying to do and gave me their money are now being paid back. And I've thought about that a lot, like with startups that take on money, like, is it hard to sleep at night? Like, how would pre-exit, like, how would you deal with that, just that reality that a lot of people had given you their money, and a lot of this result was kind of on you, like it's on your decisions. Like, how did you deal with that stress before it happened?
Yeah, you could never guarantee an outcome, and investors, both legally and in a handshake, these are high risk investments, and the people are more likely to lose their money than to make it back. But the way that I dealt with that was by making a commitment that I wouldn't quit. I wouldn't quit until it was resolved one way or another. When you start a business, you think that it's going to be a straight line from where you are to like what the answer is. And everyone always massively underestimates how long these businesses take, right? So like Oatly, for instance, 25-year-old company, right? Many, multiple decades in the making. People don't realize that, and most, say, venture funds, like investment vehicles, they have a 10-year term. There is the vast minority of venture funds actually last a 10-year term. They end up getting extended to 12 years, end up getting extended to 15 years until these things actually pay out. People always underestimate how much time it takes to actually build something that can then get liquid. And so one of the reasons why it's a relief is because as you're making all these commitments and you're building the business, you're basically just seeing the goalpost just rip like ahead of you, get further and further out, and so the fact that we did have the good fortune to have interest from Unilever when we were still a relatively young company, that was a relief.
Wow. So how many years was it from you're listening to Afrobeats with the shirt off to you sell the company?
That was 9 years.
9 years.
And then it was 7 years from when we formally commercially founded the company to when we sold it. And I had a 10-year run there from when we commercially founded it to when I ultimately left in 2020.
I want to talk about math for a second.
Yeah.
Because I think you're a very facile gentleman. I think that people kind of just, it would be easy to see you as someone who just has it all together, and it was kind of easy to become wildly successful.
Could not be further from the case.
Let's talk about math. What's your relationship with, what was your relationship with math as a kid?
I struggled with math probably starting in middle school. And we've had some conversation about this before, but like the way that math is taught is one year will always build on the prior year of learnings, right? And so you can't do calculus if you don't know algebra, right? And you can't do trigonometry if you don't know algebra. And algebra is like is arbitrary and it requires a lot of memorization, right? Of like order and operations, and like I'm good with computers, but like I'm not very organized on paper. So doing math was always really challenging for me, and I felt like I always had this just this deficit in that area. And then I discovered the topic of finance. I took a finance class, and that is what really clicked for me, because what finance is it's equal parts the mathematics of economics and also human society. Because finance is about asking the question, what is the value of something? How do you value this? And that is just as much a mathematical question as it is a psychological question, a question of human psychology.
Which you love.
Which I love, right? And so that was my way into it. And so now I have become, like, I started as the CMO of Sir Kensington's. I ended up as the CEO in the final years. And I had to be very familiar with the language of accounting and finance. And I learned to see the world through numbers. I am not a specialist in that area. I rely on partners who are specialists in that area, but I know enough to be dangerous. Unless the SEC is listening, or the IRS, in which case I am not dangerous.
Yeah,
safe.
So safe.
So that's my history with math.
Right. So this gets into the power of yet, right? Like the amount of times that we try something and fail, then self-identify as a failure in that area for years and years and years before we ever try it again. What was it like for you when you felt like you didn't have that competency, like through that decade or so? So you said in middle school, you didn't do well in math. And then was it always just kind of like a silent insecurity?
Yeah. When I was young, I had a fixed mindset. I'm not good at math. It's not for me. I'm not smart enough. My brain isn't work like that. Let me move away from it. And then I think like so many people do, as we mature and as we learn and as we learn about the world, and also I've had the benefit of working with really enlightened people who have taken the time to teach me, including my coach, who has welcomed a growth mindset and has encouraged me to take a growth mindset. And so you're right, the power of yet is about saying, I'm not good at math yet.
Right.
And related to that, one of the most important lessons that Mark, my co-founder and business partner, taught me, and that I toasted to him kind of in his final send-off party, is that one of the things that Mark taught me was, and it sounds obvious, if you work on it, it will get better.
Yeah.
If you work on it, it will get better, because the temptation with anything that's hard in life is to say, I'm always going to be bad at that. The temptation is to say, even if I try, I'm not going to be able to get it done and do it. But the truth is that a little bit of working on something moves it down the field so far. And if you have the tenacity and the resilience to like get 1% better every day and keep working on it, you will get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
And you will become good at it.
Yeah.
That's a trip. And so it's always important to remember when you're feeling that like inadequacy and fear, if I work on this, it will get better. So it becomes a question is, what is worth working on?
Right. Yeah. One of my favorite little science geek factoids is that when you're working on a new skill and you feel frustration and agitation,
Mm-hmm.
that is literally acetylcholine, a chemical in your brain being released, which is the precursor to neuroplasticity.
So it warms your brain up.
It warms your brain. Like the feeling of like, oh, this is so frustrating is a chemical being released in your brain that can restructure your brain.
Oh.
And the human brain is, as far as we know, the only animal brain that can grow and restructure through an entire lifespan.
Yeah. Wow. That is some anxiety-inducing intellectual foreplay right there. Next time I feel that stress, I'll remember that enlightenment is just about to come.
Did you feel like you had a growth mindset in other aspects of your life besides math from an early age?
Yeah, I would say socially.
Socially.
Yeah, like I'm naturally wired to make friends and find new friends to go on adventures on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see the world as this really vast, interconnected, like kind of Rolodex of people. And in high school, like at the beginning of high school, I was kind of like a loner. And I was more comfortable alone. I didn't have a lot of friends. I would say if I look back then, mild social anxiety. I mean, I think everyone does at that age. But then it became a superpower of mine. You know, like I can work a room anywhere on planet Earth. And I know how to blend in, and I know how to be similar enough, but also different enough to be interesting in a lot of different rooms and carry myself in those places. Right. And so that is an area where I had very much a growth mindset around. And I loved those moments where a door opens and you experience a new kind of like social milieu and you get to know that, and then you can kind of move from there.
Yeah. It's so fun to me that like just how often people's superpowers started as an insecurity.
Yeah. Because I still have a bias for insecurity and I still have a bias for inadequacy. In general, like I witness people doing brilliant work, ingenious work all the time. And more often than not, I look at them and I go, I could never do that. I just fundamentally could never do that.
Right.
And if I were to have a better meditation practice and journal every morning and do all the stuff they talk about on the other productivity podcasts, I would probably be a lot healthier. But I haven't gotten there yet.
Is there now a unifying theme to the companies that you're investing in? Is there something that you've found now as you have a portfolio of companies that you're investing in that is like, oh, this is a unifying theme in my life of the ideas that really interest me?
Yes, I think a lot about this, and I've kind of also observed where my own interests lie. Let's say there's two categories here. So the first, which is really important as an investor, is the financial fundamentals have to be healthy, right? And in the way that I invest, like I do like to see a good track record of traction and adoption. I'm not a super early stage investor. So that to me, like, because what consumers want is so arbitrary, I do kind of want to see, like, are the dogs eating the dog food? What I learned from Sir Kensington's was the importance of gross margin. So very in simple terms, like the difference in cost between what you buy and what you sell, that is fundamentally going to fund the rest of your business. And so I have a propensity for high margin categories that just give you a lot more breathing room. And then, of course, in this bucket of kind of the harder things, founders that are organized and resilient and communicative and aren't going to quit. They have a really high sense of grit and emotional toughness, intellectual toughness, because it is a marathon. And then in terms of the more like fun stuff to talk about, the second bucket, I love companies that see where culture is going and notice something that others don't about changes in culture and are able to accelerate that change and able to preempt that change. And so my favorite companies that I'm involved in are ones that are almost like on the margins of being socially acceptable, like an emergency contraception company, right? That I've backed as an example is it's in a place that's like, a little bit touchy, but where society is going is education around that and necessity around that. And the way that they are, companies called Julie, the way that they're pairing education with a functional product, those are the types of companies that I really like to back. Mudwater, we're sitting in their space now, being another one that has realized that the crisis of our time is mental health. And we're basically all self-medicating ourselves from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go to bed in the evening with things that fuel dopamine and serotonin, from cups of coffee and caffeine to energy drinks to our phone, which is the most powerful drug of all that we experience on a daily basis. And finding a way to, as Mud as a company, of course, they make a product that you can drink, but their message is reclaim your mind, right? That is something that you don't hear about that stuff on the radio so much, right? I mean, like Oprah, I'm sure touches it a bit, but I like these kind of missionary-driven companies that want to shape culture.
So once you get through the fundamentals of a brand and you're getting into the creative stuff of like, oh, this could be a fun thing, how much do you rely on senses in your body to make decisions?
I think it's very important to pay attention to the senses that say no, but it can be very dangerous to pay attention to the senses that say yes.
Preach, brother, preach. I know what you're talking about.
On the second piece, the senses that say yes, it is electrifying to talk to people who are building their dreams. And when you talk to entrepreneurs, it's very easy to get to this place of a full body yes, that you want to support them, you want to believe in the future that's being built. And you cannot make decisions in a point of an emotional crescendo and excitement. You have to press pause on it. Gut feeling, I think, can be very dangerous in financial decisions. Unlike investing in public markets, when you invest in startups and in private markets, there is no button that says sell. You do not have the choice to sell a company. You can buy a stock like, GameStop or whatever during the great meme uprising, and the next day you can click sell. And maybe you lose money, maybe you make money, the next minute you click sell. When you're investing in a private company, you are most often making a 10-year commitment to be in a relationship with the person and to have your money or other people's money tied up in that. So it's very important to pay attention to some of those messages, but not to act on what you feel in your body. On the other hand, when something doesn't feel right, that is the wisdom of hundreds of thousands of years of mammalian evolution telling you this is not a good use of your time and money. Be careful here. And a lot of other people might be saying, well, look at the facts, look at the numbers, look at this, look at that, look at this other investor who got involved. But when you feel like something is wrong, something is off interpersonally or in what the way that the company is conducting business, I think it's very important because, again, you are going to live with this decision for a long time. And the last thing you ever want is to be like, I should have listened to like this warning symbol or this warning sign that was going off on me. So I think it's very important to listen to the parts of your body that express caution.
Yeah, there's a line from the writer James Clear where he talks about hats, haircuts, and tattoos.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
He says, some decisions are hats. You try them on, you can take them off. Some decisions are like haircuts. You need to live with them for a month or two.
Yes.
And some decisions, like investing in a company, is a tattoo.
Yeah, it's a cross between a tattoo and a haircut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beach that you drew on the sand. I believe you drew the acronym Maya.
Oh, yeah. Maya is an industrial design concept that stands for most advanced yet acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And so in product design, like if you create something that is too out there for the consumer, it will not be acceptable to them. It will not check the box of a product. Like if we were to call our product like Sir Kensington scooping like tomato relish,
Mm-hmm.
No one like tomato relish isn't on anyone's shopping list. So it would be like too chunky, too weird, too out there. But if it's not differentiated, if it's not advanced, it won't actually add value to their life. It won't be attractive to them. And so you need a balance of novelty and nostalgia. And so, most advanced yet acceptable, like I think Tesla's a really good example of this. They said with a Model 3, we're going to strip down the interior as much as possible, right? And it's still going to be acceptable to the consumer, but it's not going to look like the interior of every other car. I think the Cybertruck is also a great example of how do they push that to the next level, like really barely on the edge of making something like, point fingers, and has a lot of haters out there, but it has enough boosters and fans, and it is certainly in that advanced category. And so when you're designing a new product, I like this concept of most advanced yet acceptable, or Maya.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's do some hot take questions.
All right.
You ready for it?
Oh, great. We're there already. Cool.
Yeah. Should puffer jackets be banned from CEOs?
Puffer jackets. You mean like Patagonia vests?
Yes.
No, they shouldn't be banned. Let them cook.
Let them cook.
They'll eventually figure out style.
How do you think this cultural moment happened where it seems like everyone who's in the C-suite wears puffer jackets?
Well, business casual clothing is so boring and ugly, right? We at some point degraded from wearing suits, but you can't, in many circles just wear a t-shirt. And so I think it came to the fact that a jacket, like a blazer, was too much of a statement for West Coast business leaders. But you also, especially in San Francisco, it gets cold. So you need something to sort of adorn your body. And so I think that the gilet, the Patagonia vest, became just that was the statement. It was it was cool enough yet non-offensive that everyone started wearing those.
I may have gone on a long hike last weekend, but no one can be sure. That's what it says.
Yeah, and they are quite they're wonderful. I mean, they keep your core warm. They are stylish.
They're the best.
I love my Patagonia vest.
Is non-alcoholic beer a fad?
I think it is. Yeah, I think non-alcoholic beer is a fad. And this is a hot take. It's hotly debated, and I don't really understand why someone would choose to consume 130 calories if it doesn't also get them tipsy.
Yeah.
Right? I'm willing to have a beer. I'm willing to drink liquid bread because I'm going to feel amazing for 45 minutes after I drink it. The idea that someone's drink all these calories and fill yourself up before a meal and you're not even going to get a little bit high.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
Yeah. Now we have fat, sober people. What is this?
Yeah. But what I don't think is a fad, what I think is a real trend, is moving away from alcohol. Because alcohol it's the most, alongside caffeine, it's the most normalized psychoactive drug in Western society. And yet it is incredibly unhealthy. And I do like to drink. I do like to drink. I wish I drank less, but it is caloric. It is, bad for your body. It scatters your brain. It makes you feel foggy the next day. It impairs your judgment, right? There's all these things. So I think, quote unquote, California sober, which is not drinking alcohol, but still participating in other psychoactive substances, that I think is here to stay.
If you could have one artist, living or dead, as a podcast guest, who would it be?
One artist. I think Ai Weiwei would be an amazing one. Do you know who
Yep.
Yeah, I think Ai Weiwei, and I'm a fan of his art, but he's much more of an activist than an artist. But you say like living or dead. So actually, I got to say Leonardo da Vinci if we're saying dead, right? Because Leonardo da Vinci was art and business. He was, he designed the canals of Milan. He invented the first helicopter. He is, of course, an artist, like painted the Mona Lisa. So if a living artist, Ai Weiwei, deceased artist, Leonardo.
He'd be perfect. He's doing art and commerce.
But I would need a translator in like whatever 14th century Italiano.
One recipe for us.
One recipe. Wonderful. I've asked this question so many times. I had to think about what I would recommend cooking. Well, we have two dishes in our household that get asked for at birthday parties. So I have two young kids, 5 and 7, and also my wife, and we cook vast majority of our meals at home. We don't go out much because I love to cook. The two recipes that get asked for are beef bourguignon and Japanese Tonkatsu, and I'll give you the Tonkatsu recipe. So 200 years ago, it was not actually considered socially acceptable or legal to eat meat in Japan. They only ate fish, right, and things from the sea. And it was after encountering Western military forces that the Japanese government was like, "What are you guys eating? Like, how are you so tall and strong?" And they were like, "Well, we eat meat. What do you eat?" And so the Emperor of Japan, I believe this was the Meiji period, publicly said it is okay to eat meat now. And so Japan started eating meat. And around World War II, when the Germans were allied with the Japanese, there was the introduction of schnitzel to Japan. Schnitzel or Milanese is essentially a flat breaded cutlet of either pork or chicken. And in this case, we'll use pork. But it is a Japanese rendition of the European schnitzel recipe. And so what you do is you take a pork chop with no bone in it, and you score it with a knife so that it's kind of gashed and can be more flexible. You whack it with a meat mallet and you flatten it really to your own liking, right? It could be as thin as a 1/4 inch, but normally it's a little bit thicker, maybe a 1/3 or 1/2 inch. And then you dredge that in flour so that the egg will stick to it. You dredge it in an egg, raw egg, and then you dust it with panko breadcrumbs. So you cover it in panko breadcrumbs, and at the same time you're heating oil. So this is either deep fried or shallow fried dish. You heat oil before the smoke point so that it's not smoking, but you want it nice and piping hot. You then take the breaded cutlet and you drop it into the oil and you watch and wait. And you wait for it to cook. And the panko breadcrumbs are like a light color, and as you cook them, they'll get darker and darker. You pull it out. I've read this in a cookbook, and I've heard this Japanese chef say, you pull it out when it is the color of fox fur. When the color of the kitsune.
That's fox fur.
When the Tonkatsu is the color of fox fur, you pull it out and you rest it on paper towel.
Yeah. I eat many foxes, so I can just put a fox next to this.
And then you serve it next to white rice. And you serve it, if you have a mandolin, great, but if not, just use a really sharp knife to shred cabbage, green cabbage, as thinly as you possibly can. And you put a little bit of rice wine vinegar and toasted sesame oil on that. And then on the Tonkatsu itself, you can dip it in the sauce called otafuku sauce, or what's also known as bulldog sauce. There is a brand called Bachan's that makes a Japanese barbecue sauce that's a little bit thinner than bulldog sauce, which is easily available in all grocery stores. You then slice you slice into kind of bite-sized pieces that cutlet that you made, and you serve it in a plate. That's Tonkatsu.
Making me hungry, Scott Norton. You're making me hungry. This is so much fun, man. I really appreciate you letting me play host, and and just for all that you've done for me in my life. I mean, people don't know this, but like the amount that you have invested in me from an idea standpoint and the amount of just knowledge you've given me as I'm navigating my path in advertising has both from a tactical standpoint been really helpful, but also just showing me how fun this thing can be when you blend art and commerce has been very meaningful to me.
Well,
So,
I'm touched to hear that. I cherish the time we spend together, and I very much value our friendship. So thank you for hosting my show.
we got to go surf again.
We'll do it soon.
Thank you for tuning into At Large. Today's episode was produced by Sick Bird Productions. Our theme song is Son of Sanford by Motion Worker. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and by email at atlargeshow.com. Follow me at SWH Norton on Instagram and Twitter, and DM me about the guests you want to hear on the show.